You can see that the trust rating is very low. Now, the policy statements of the United States and China, they want to modify the Philippine-U.S. defense ties to focus on terrorism and drugs instead of external defense. This is quite a major departure from what we've been noting for about 50 years of our mutual defense treaty through the joint exercises. And Secretary Yasay announced that the Philippines is temporarily setting aside the zero with China. The objective is to develop a stronger relationship with China, and they look at the decision of the arbitral tribunal as a possible thorn. So it's being set aside temporarily. Now what we are seeing in the area is the convergence of the most powerful military powers of the world. It's generating some kind of a new arms race. This is the Indo-Pacific area. I already mentioned this. What are the powers in the region? Practically all of the big powers are there. The US is of course there with their carrier battle groups and bombers. China, a rising power, considered number 3 military power in the world. They have this new aircraft carrier, the Liaoning, and a lot of submarines and destroyers and top-of-the-line fighter planes. Japan is a big military power also. They have this, they call this destroyer, but they look more like aircraft carriers. They're very easy to convert into fixed-wing aircraft carriers. They have world-class submarines, very powerful destroyers, and very sizable air force. Imagine 213 F-15s, and they ordered 42 F-35s, state-of-the-art fighter planes that can be game changers. Vietnam is a sizable military power. They acquired very recently 6 Kilo class submarines from Russia, and they have a lot of planes also. Most of them coming from Russia. Sukhoi 22, Sukhoi 27, and Sukhoi 30. Australia is there. They're buying $50 billion worth of submarines, Air Force. India has a very powerful presence in the area. They have aircraft carriers. They have 2. They have submarines, Kilo class, Akula class submarines, and they have a lot of fighter planes as well. And of course, they are very active in the Malabar exercise jointly with the US and with Japan. Pakistan is also there also. Pakistan is technically an ally of the United States, but also very closely identified with China, and they have a sizable military and also nuclear capable. Russia is there, the second most powerful military in the world. But of course, with the entry of President Trump, we don't know where Russia is going to be, especially considering that Russia is also supplying arms to Vietnam, which is a known adversary of China. So here is the disposition of forces in the Indo-Pacific area. A lot of power there. How China and US, how do they compare in terms of army, artillery, battle tanks, submarines, aircraft, and destroyers. Here's another lineup in terms of nuclear warheads. China's 240 against about 9,000. I think right now it's about 7,000 for the US. In terms of budget, well, this is not updated. Right now the budget of China is about $130 billion against almost 700 for the US, and this is expected to go up with the entry of President Trump. In terms of submarines, aircraft carriers, etc., regional naval maritime power, you see China's 303, patrol vessels 205. And here's a better comparison. The maritime law enforcement, we're talking of Coast Guard capability here. Coast Guard and maritime surveillance. China has 205, Japan has 78, Vietnam has 55, Indonesia has 8, Malaysia has 2, and the Philippines has 4. So you see the overwhelming presence of China in the South China Sea in terms of Coast Guard and maritime surveillance ships. Of course, these are the naval combatants. 303 for China, 67 for Japan, 61 for Indonesia, Vietnam 37, Malaysia 23, and 14 for the Philippines. We have a mutual defense treaty. It's supposed to continue, the Balikatan exercise is supposed to continue, but modified to focus on terrorism and also civic action instead of focusing on external threat, which is how it had been in the past decades. We have EDCA, the expanded defense cooperation agreement. Duterte announces military economic break with the US, but that was later modified also. What about EDCA? You're familiar with EDCA. There are 5 bases identified as EDCA bases, and 4 of them are air bases. The only non-air base is Port Magsaysay in Nueva Ecija. This is an army base. We have the Basa Air Base in Pampanga, Bautista Air Base in Palawan, Mactan Air Base in Cebu, and Lumbia Air Base in Cagayan de Oro. So you can see that what is appearing here, the concept of defense would be basically air-sea battle, air in particular. A lot of people are questioning why should EDCA, some people are saying EDCA should be terminated, but of course a lot of people are objecting to this also, especially within the military. Now, there's the Trump factor. I call it a game changer from President Obama to President Trump. And it is my feeling that because of this, the Philippines must start considering the recalibration and rebalancing of our foreign policy with the entry of the Trump administration. The Trump team is expected to be hardliner. I think you've all read about that, hardliner as far as China is concerned. In fact, even before the entry of President Trump, countries like Japan, Philippines, up to a certain extent before the Duterte administration, Vietnam, India, even Indonesia, have been bearing the brunt of China's territorial aggressiveness since 2012. And much earlier in the case of the Philippines because of China's grabbing of Siem Reap in 1995. We will need to review the announced foreign policy towards China away from the United States under the Duterte administration because of the following developments. We are looking at an emerging coalition of against China led by Japan, India, Australia, Vietnam, and of late Indonesia. Even Indonesia is starting to have problems with China because of the Natuna Sea area where fishing boats from China are starting to intrude into that area, and it's bothering the Indonesian leadership right now. During the pre-Trump victory period, strong statements emanated from the Pentagon and the Pacific Command. But obviously they were a little restrained by the White House under President Obama. But judging from the statements of Trump's security team and from the president himself, I wrote this, by the way, before he became president. I call him president-elect. We expect a more muscular policy to push back China. This is the expectation. And let's look at the economic powers of the world, how they are aligned right now. Here is the ranking of the economic powers of the world. The US, some people are saying, oh, China is about to overtake the United States, but still a long way because the US has a GDP of $18 trillion against a GDP of China of 11 trillion as of 2016. So that's still a $7 trillion difference. And if you do a little arithmetic, I did, if China would grow by 6.5%, US by about 3%, it'll take about 8 years for China to reach 18 trillion. But by that time, the US GDP will be about 22 trillion plus already. Japan, 4.7 trillion. Germany, 3.4. UK 2.6, France 2.4, India 2.2, Italy 1.8, Brazil 1.7, Canada 1.5, and South Korea 1.4. And EU has a combined GDP of 17 trillion. If you look at this alignment, you will note that China is almost alone in that area. China cannot claim any of the other countries as strong friends, unlike in the case of the United States, which has a very strong economic and strategic alliance with practically all of these top 11 countries of the world economically. And then in terms of military power, here would be the lineup of countries that have the military capability to project power in the Indo-Pacific area in ranking. Number 1, US, number 2, Russia, number 3, China, number 4, Japan, number 5, India, number 6, South Korea, 7, UK, 8, Pakistan, Taiwan, number 9, 10, Australia, 11, Thailand, 12, Indonesia, and 13, Canada. And if you look at this alignment, almost all of them are strongly aligned with the United States, except for 1 or 2. You ask about UK. UK is considered a power that can project their presence in the Indo-Pacific area, because the UK has already announced that they're going to station a squadron of fighter planes in Japan, because they would like their presence felt in the Indo-Pacific area. So the US can claim geosecurity clauses in practically all of the top military powers, but China can count only 1 in that area. Prime Minister Abe of Japan conducted a swing of 4 critical countries recently. I think you read about that. Philippines, Australia, Indonesia, Vietnam. And there's an emerging alliance inspired by Japan. India and Vietnam have military ties that have strengthened of late. India has announced its willingness to provide Vietnam with potent BrahMos missiles. These are very powerful missiles, and are training Vietnam in the use of Russian-made fighter planes and the use of the newly acquired Kilo-class submarines from Russia, now acquired by Vietnam. Indonesia has asked US assistance in upgrading their naval base fronting the Natuna. And in the case of Russia, it is my considered opinion that Russia cannot be considered a committed ally of China, especially of late with President Trump apparently applying a strategy of befriending Russia and isolating China. That's why I think it's very important for us to really recalibrate. Pulse Asia conducted another survey of the trust rating. The US got a trust rating of plus 76%. Japan plus 70%. On the other hand, China, which has directly engaged the Philippines in the maritime dispute, has a distrust rating of 61%. So that is something that I think policymakers will have to consider, because they cannot ignore the pulse of the people as far as US-China issue is concerned. To continue to pivot towards China goes against, this is my 2 cents worth of opinion, goes against the grain of both geopolitical currents and domestic opinion. And of course, very recently, we have the confirmation of what I mentioned, the pre-Trump victory statements coming from them. Now, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State nominee, I think it has been approved already at the committee level and about to be approved in his confirmation. He announced China's island building has to stop, and its access to those islands will also stop. This came as a shock. A lot of people were shocked. A lot of people thought that he was making a statement that may be not in consonance with the personal position of President Trump. However, very strong words. However, just the other day, in the first press conference of the Press Secretary Spicer, of the White House, he repeated that statement. He said, the Trump